An orca's brain weighs close to 15 pounds, roughly 4 times heavier than a human brain, and second in overall mass only to the sperm whale among all animals on Earth. For most of the 20th century, that fact alone was treated as the entire story. Big brain, intelligent animal, case closed. Textbooks ranked species intelligence largely by raw brain size or brain-to-body ratio, and orcas landed near the top of that list almost by default. That measurement turns out to have been the wrong number to focus on entirely. Newer research examining the actual internal structure of the orca brain has found something far more specific and far stranger than simple size ever suggested, and it's forced a genuine rewrite of what scientists thought they understood about this animal. The correction starts with a type of brain cell called a spindle neuron, also known as a von Economo neuron. For decades, these cells were believed to exist only in humans and a small number of great apes, and were considered directly linked to some of our most complex cognitive functions: social awareness, emotional regulation, and rapid intuitive decision-making in social situations. Their apparent rarity across the animal kingdom was treated as evidence that this kind of neural wiring was something close to uniquely human. Then, researchers found spindle neurons in orca brains. Not in small token numbers either. In some regions of the orca brain associated with social processing, the density of these cells matches or exceeds what's found in the human brain in the same regions. This discovery alone forced a reconsideration of decades of assumptions, because it meant one of the specific neural structures scientists had linked most closely to complex human social cognition was in fact independently present in a completely different mammalian lineage that split from our own evolutionary path tens of millions of years ago. That single finding reframed how researchers approached everything else about orca behavior, because it suggested the brain wasn't just large. It was specifically structurally built around processing complex social information, and once scientists started looking at orca behavior through that lens, the behavioral evidence started lining up. Take vocal communication. Orca pods do not simply make generic whale sounds. Different pods maintain distinct vocal dialects, specific sequences of calls that function almost like regional accents. So consistent and so specific that researchers can often identify which pod a group of orcas belongs to purely by listening to their calls without any visual confirmation at all. These dialects are not innate. They're learned, socially transmitted from adults to calves over years, and they drift and change over generations the way human language does. An orca separated from its birth pod and integrated into a different one will, over time, begin picking up elements of its new pod's dialect. That is not simple instinctive vocalization. That's cultural transmission, passed down and modified across generations, which is a behavior researchers once assumed was close to exclusive to humans and a small number of other highly social species. There's also a shift in how researchers view orca problem solving, and it follows the same pattern of underestimation. For a long time, tool use in the animal kingdom was treated as a relatively rare marker of advanced cognition, largely documented in primates, some birds, and a handful of other species observed manipulating objects to achieve a specific goal. Orcas were rarely included in that conversation, partly because tool use in a marine environment looks completely different from a chimpanzee using a stick, and partly because so much orca behavior happens far from direct human observation. More recent long-term observation has documented orcas using coordinated, deliberately engineered techniques that go well beyond simple instinct, generating synchronized waves to dislodge prey from ice, or manipulating the physical behavior of prey animals through repeated, practiced group coordination that has to be learned and refined over years rather than performed correctly on a first attempt. These aren't single clever incidents. They're consistent, teachable methods, passed down within specific family groups that differ measurably from the techniques used by other orca populations facing similar hunting problems elsewhere in the world. Different groups arriving at different specialized solutions to the same basic problem is, again, a pattern usually associated with cultural learning rather than pure genetic instinct. Then there's the discovery that reshaped an entire branch of evolutionary biology on its own: menopause. Female orcas can live for many decades after their reproductive years end, sometimes surviving 30 to 40 years past their last successful pregnancy. For a long time, this was considered an evolutionary puzzle, because in most species, an individual's reproductive value and its evolutionary usefulness to the group are treated as roughly the same thing. An animal that stops reproducing but keeps consuming resources should, in theory, be selected against over time. Orcas are one of only a small handful of species on the planet known to experience true menopause. Long-term population studies have found that post-reproductive female orcas play a measurable, active leadership role within their pods, particularly during periods of food scarcity when older, experienced females are disproportionately likely to lead the group toward productive hunting grounds, relying on decades of accumulated environmental memory that younger, still reproducing females simply haven't had time to build. Pods with an older, post-reproductive female present have been shown in multiple studies to have measurably higher calf survival rates during lean years compared to pods without one. In other words, evolution didn't overlook these individuals. It specifically preserved decades of non-reproductive life, because the accumulated knowledge and leadership that comes with age was valuable enough to the entire group's survival to be worth the biological cost. This same body of research has also documented sustained, complex grief responses in orcas following the death of a calf or close pod member. Extended periods where mothers have been observed carrying deceased calves for well over a week, refusing to let go even as the behavior visibly costs the mother significant energy and disrupts normal feeding patterns. Researchers studying these responses generally avoid claiming certainty about the internal emotional experience involved, since that's extraordinarily difficult to measure in any animal. But the sustained, costly, clearly non-instinctive nature of the behavior is difficult to explain through simple reflex alone, and it fits the same broader pattern showing up across every other area of orca behavior. An animal whose social and emotional processing runs far deeper than raw brain size alone ever indicated. So here's the actual correction. The old assumption wasn't wrong because orcas turned out to be less intelligent than believed. It was wrong because the entire framework, ranking species by brain size or brain-to-body ratio, was measuring the wrong thing from the start. Once researchers looked past raw size and into the actual specialized structure of the orca brain, and then matched that structure against real behavioral evidence, cultural dialects passed across generations, a menopause system that actively preserves decades of accumulated knowledge, and grief responses sustained well past the point of pure survival logic, a much more specific picture emerged. Not simply a big brain. A brain built in ways strikingly similar to our own, specifically around navigating a complex, deeply social world.